I've been around long enough to know that life is full of curveballs. Business, family, everything. It's all one big game of balance. And for the longest time, I thought I had it all figured out. As a self-made entrepreneur who built his career from scratch, I knew what hard work meant. My company was thriving, and despite the ups and downs, I had a solid reputation in the business world. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I realized how little my family thought of me. It was a few months before my daughter's wedding, and things seemed to be progressing smoothly, or so I thought. The venue was booked, the invitations were sent out, and everything had the trappings of a high-class event. It was the wedding of the season, and, like any father, I was proud. Proud of my daughter, proud of everything I'd worked for. But there was a deeper layer that I wasn't seeing, a layer that would eventually peel away and reveal an ugly truth. The first sign of trouble came during the wedding planning meetings. I could tell that my future son-in-law, Mark, was being a little too hands-off for someone who was about to join our family. His family, with all their wealth and connections, seemed to be running the show. At first I didn't mind. After all, I figured it was his family's moment too, and I didn't want to step on any toes. But as the days went by, I started noticing a pattern. I was being slowly and systematically cut out of the decision-making process. The big choices, catering, flowers, the music, the venue, were all being decided by Mark's family without so much as a word to me. My daughter, of course, was caught in the middle, but I could see the look in her eyes. She was conflicted but too wrapped up in the planning to notice how much I was being pushed to the sidelines. Then, things took a turn for the worse. At a dinner just a few weeks before the wedding, we had what I thought would be a simple rehearsal dinner with close family and friends. It was supposed to be a casual evening, a time to relax before the big day. But when I arrived, I was met with a cold reception. Mark's parents, who had been so polite and warm during our first meetings, were now distant, their smiles forced. My daughter looked tense, and her fiancé barely acknowledged my presence. Still, I tried to keep my cool, not wanting to make waves before the wedding. But then it happened. Just as we were about to sit down for the meal, Mark's father, an imposing man, always with a veneer of politeness, pulled me aside. He spoke in a tone that made my stomach churn. "We need to talk about the venue payment," he said, his eyes sharp. "We haven't received the full amount yet, and we're running out of time. We're counting on you to cover the remaining balance." I was taken aback. I had already contributed a significant amount to the wedding, far more than I had initially intended. But I had agreed because it was my daughter's big day. Still, this was different. This wasn't just about contributing as a father. It was as if they were treating me like a bank. "I've already given more than enough," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "The rest should be covered by Mark's family, as we discussed." There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension in the air. I thought Mark would step in, but he didn't. Instead, his father's face tightened, and he glanced toward my daughter, who was standing by the door, looking uncomfortable. "We need you to take care of this, John," he said, his voice dripping with a sense of entitlement. "You know how important this is. We don't have time for excuses." That's when it hit me. I wasn't being asked to help with the wedding, I was being coerced. They had already made up their minds that I would cover the cost, no questions asked. I wasn't part of the planning, part of the family decisions. I was just a wallet, and in that moment, something snapped inside me. I refused. I stood firm and said, "I'm not writing a check for the venue, Mark. If that's an issue, maybe we need to rethink how we're handling this wedding." The response was swift and brutal. Mark's father gave me a sharp look, then nodded to his wife, who, without missing a beat, stood up and announced, "If you're not going to contribute, then maybe you should leave the dinner. We can't afford any distractions tonight." I was stunned. Here I was, the father of the bride, and I was being asked to leave my own daughter's rehearsal dinner. And the worst part? No one, not even my daughter, came to my defense. It was as if they had already made their decision about me. I wasn't part of their vision for the future, not as a father, not as a businessman, just as a necessary inconvenience. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of it all, the coldness, the disrespect, the complete disregard for everything I had done for them, for my daughter. Without saying another word, I walked out of the room, my head spinning with the realization that I had been taken for granted all along. What was supposed to be a celebration of family had turned into a farce, and I was no longer welcome. I left the dinner that night with a deep sense of betrayal. But more than that, I felt something else stirring inside me, something far more dangerous. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had made a grave mistake, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. No. I would show them just how much they underestimated me. The coldness they had shown me would pale in comparison to what was coming next, and I would take back my dignity, my respect, and my family. They hadn't seen the last of me. The night after the rehearsal dinner, I sat in the quiet of my office, a feeling of emptiness hanging in the air. The city lights outside the window seemed distant, their glow no longer offering the comfort it once did. It was a typical late evening for me. This had always been the time I felt most productive, my thoughts racing with ideas and business plans, my mind clear. But tonight, all I could focus on was the sharp, raw sting of humiliation that had pierced me at that dinner. I'd spent years building my business, making sure that my family was provided for, even if it meant sacrificing time, energy, and some personal desires. I never once thought that the people closest to me would treat me as anything less than family, than someone who had earned their respect and admiration. But that night, after everything I had given them, after all the hard work I had poured into not just building a legacy, but a life for them, I was dismissed as if I was nothing. I had known for some time that my daughter, Lizzie, was on the verge of marrying a man from a family whose wealth had always seemed a bit exaggerated. Mark's family had the kind of power and prestige that was almost mythical. From the moment Lizzie started dating him, I could see the subtle shifts in the dynamics, how they began to subtly see me less as a father and more as a checkbook to be written from. At first, I brushed it off. A wedding is supposed to be extravagant, right? It's the most important day of their lives, so it's only natural they'd want things done the way they want. But then, the little hints of disrespect became impossible to ignore. The way they made decisions without consulting me, the way Mark's mother assumed the wedding, was as much about her social standing as it was about Lizzie's happiness. My daughter had become more of a prop in their social game than the bride in her own wedding. And me? Well, I was the cash cow, the one expected to fund every extravagant detail. The wedding venue, the flowers, the catering, everything had been meticulously planned around what they wanted, not what I could afford, and certainly not what I was willing to give. The rehearsal dinner should have been a time for celebration, a gathering of family and friends, a moment to reflect on the years of love and care Lizzie and I had shared. But instead, it became the point of no return. The moment I was dismissed from the event like a guest who had overstayed their welcome, I knew something had shifted. Mark's family had made it clear that I was no longer important, no longer part of their plan. I was expected to write a hefty check for the venue, which was an unreasonable amount given the circumstances. When I refused, they didn't even hesitate. They asked me to leave. They didn't want my presence, they just wanted my money, and that was it. That was the moment I realized I was nothing more than a tool in their eyes, a pawn in their carefully constructed image of wealth and privilege. I left that night feeling a mix of fury, disbelief, and, to my shame, a bit of hurt. They had pushed me into a corner, but what they didn't know was that in that very moment, I was starting to realize something far more important. They had underestimated me, and that was their mistake. Back in my office, the anger started to burn away, replaced by something clearer, something far more productive. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I wasn't going to simply take the insult, walk away, and pretend like it didn't matter. After all, what kind of man would I be if I just let this happen? The very idea of quietly accepting their treatment went against everything I had built my life on. I had spent decades building a career from nothing, fighting every single day to create something of value. I had built a business from the ground up, and I would be damned if I let a bunch of entitled, manipulative people tear me down. As I sat there, the more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. I had worked too damn hard to let these people define me. It was time for a change, and that change was going to come from me. This was my moment to take back control, not just of the situation, but of my life. They thought they could humiliate me, cast me aside, use me for my money, and get away with it. But they were wrong. I stood up, pacing across the room, my mind already racing through the steps I needed to take. I wasn't just going to walk away from this quietly. I wasn't going to let them continue to use my money to fund their lavish, fake lives while I stood in the background, a forgotten afterthought. No, if they wanted to play this game, I would play it better. I would expose them for what they really were. The first thing I did was look at the financial statements of my business. They were second nature to me. Numbers had always been something I was comfortable with, but tonight, The numbers on those pages began to represent something far more than just profits and losses. They were the key to unraveling Mark's family's facade of wealth. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that their business dealings weren't as clean as they appeared. I had heard rumors, seen red flags before, but had brushed them off as mere gossip. Now, those rumors seemed to be the key to exposing them for who they truly were. I started digging, reviewing old financial records, emails, and investment reports. What I found made my blood run cold. They had been hiding assets for years, laundering money through shady investments, inflating their business's value to lure investors. The wedding itself had been nothing more than a cover, a way to get me to invest in their vanity project, while they leveraged their connections to funnel money through dishonest means. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep the deception went. They had been using my daughter's wedding as a way to tighten their grip on my wealth, using it as a form of emotional extortion. And what hurt even more was that they had orchestrated the entire thing to push me out of the picture. They knew that once I refused to write the check for the venue, I would have no choice but to walk away. It wasn't just about money. It was about making me feel powerless, about making me feel small. But in that moment, I realized something else. I had the power to turn it all around. I could be the one to take control of the situation. They thought they were using me. But now, the tables were about to turn. I was going to use my knowledge, my position, and my resources to expose them for who they really were. I wasn't just going to take the insult lying down. I was going to stand up, and I was going to fight back. The decision was made. The very thing they thought would break me, push me into the background, reduce me to a background character in my own life, was actually the catalyst I needed to reclaim my own narrative. It was time to act, and this time, the game was going to be played on my terms. I wasn't just going to be a passive bystander anymore. I was going to be the one who controlled the story. And if they thought I was going to let this go without a fight, they had another thing coming. After that night at the rehearsal dinner, I knew I couldn't just let things slide. I spent days stewing over what had happened, turning the events over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. But the more I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. Something didn't add up. The whole situation felt off, and I was determined to figure out what was going on beneath the surface. So I did what I've always done in business when faced with uncertainty. I started digging. My company was built on a foundation of integrity, but I had learned long ago that there are people out there who will use whatever leverage they can to manipulate and take advantage. Mark's family was no exception. They had tried to humiliate me, to push me into a corner. They assumed I was too naive, too trusting to see their game. But they were wrong. I started by reviewing financial records. I knew my business inside and out, but what about theirs? I had no idea what I would find, but I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. The numbers started to paint a different picture, one I wasn't expecting. Mark and his family were hiding assets, funneling money through a series of offshore accounts that were supposed to be clean, but were anything but. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the spreadsheets, the figures not adding up the way they should. It wasn't just that they were hiding money, it was what they were doing with it. Mark's family had been manipulating financial statements to create the illusion of wealth, inflating their assets and income to make it seem like they were far more successful than they really were. They had been convincing investors to back them by putting on a show of financial stability, all while running a very different operation behind the scenes. And the wedding? Well, that was just another piece of their plan to leverage my wealth. I quickly realized that the lavish wedding they were planning wasn't just a display of wealth. It was a calculated move to secure even more money from me. The entire event was an orchestrated scheme to manipulate me into writing checks I didn't want to write. They had designed it all to make me feel obligated, to make me feel like I had no choice but to foot the bill for their ridiculous display of opulence. What struck me the most was how deliberate their actions had been. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to use this wedding as a way to humiliate me, to push me to the margins of my daughter's life. They had carefully crafted the entire situation so that I would be forced to step back. They planned on using my refusal to pay for the venue as the justification for cutting me out entirely. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. They wanted to control me to make me feel small and insignificant. I started connecting the dots between their business dealings and the wedding plans. The venue, the caterers, the photographers, they were all tied to businesses that had questionable financials. I'd seen these vendors around, heard their names whispered in certain circles. They weren't the kind of companies that worked with reputable clients. In fact, most of them were known for taking advantage of people like me, wealthy individuals who didn't ask too many questions. But I had learned not to trust appearances, especially when it came to money. I sat there for hours combing through emails, contracts, and bank statements. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was a coordinated effort to manipulate me, to use my wealth to cover up their fraudulent activities. They were treating me like an ATM, a source of cash to fund their schemes while they played the part of the perfect family in front of everyone else. And all the while, I had been led to believe that I was helping to make my daughter's dream wedding a reality. The worst part was realizing how they had used my relationship with Lizzie as a pawn in their game. They knew how much I loved her, how badly I wanted to see her happy. They had played on those emotions, making me feel like I couldn't back out without damaging my relationship with my daughter. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. I made a few calls, and what I uncovered only solidified my growing suspicions. Mark's family wasn't just financially mismanaging their affairs. They were actively hiding assets and inflating their wealth to keep up appearances. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that the wedding wasn't just an event. It was a cover-up. They were using the wedding as a smokescreen, a way to draw attention away from their financial problems. And I had been unwittingly dragged into the middle of it all. But now that I had the facts, I could see their plan for what it was. They were using my status and my money to prop up their failing empire. They had expected me to be too distracted, too eager to please, to notice. They had thought I would simply go along with whatever they said because they had positioned themselves as the more powerful family. But now, I had something they didn't expect. The truth. And once I had that, nothing could stop me from turning the tables. The moment I realized what they had been doing, everything shifted. I wasn't going to play along anymore. I wasn't going to let them use me as their financial backer, their pawn in this twisted game of wealth and power. They thought they could use my wealth to prop up their illusion of success, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I would expose them, and I would make sure everyone knew who they really were. I was no longer just a bystander in my daughter's wedding story. I was taking control of the narrative, and I was about to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. I had the evidence, the knowledge, and the determination to make sure that Mark and his family couldn't get away with what they had done. The wedding plot had been unveiled, and now it was time to put an end to it. It was strange how the sense of power washed over me once I had all the facts. I had spent my entire career building a reputation of respect and integrity, yet here I was, on the cusp of using all that I had worked for, not for good, but for revenge. But it wasn't just about vengeance. It was about standing up for what was right, for reclaiming my dignity and taking control of the situation that had spiraled beyond my understanding. I knew what I had to do. The wedding wasn't just an expensive affair. It was a tool Mark's family had used to manipulate me, to turn me into their financial backing, while simultaneously cutting me out of my daughter's life. This wasn't just about canceling a wedding, about pulling the plug on their elaborate plans for a lavish celebration. It was about dismantling their charade, exposing them for who they really were. I had already put the pieces together. The venue, the catering, the florists, all were lined up through shady connections, linked to businesses with inflated budgets and questionable dealings. The moment I decided to act, I realized the true power I held. The whole wedding was in my hands. Every vendor, every contract, every reservation was linked to my name or my company's name. I had the power to destroy it all in an instant. It wasn't a matter of whether I could do it, it was a matter of when. I called the wedding planner first. I could practically hear the gasp over the phone as I calmly explained that the venue reservation was no longer valid. It was surreal, but I had to keep my composure. I knew they were expecting me to falter, to beg for forgiveness or to cave in. But I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. Their game was over, and I was the one rewriting the script. "Excuse me?" the planner stuttered. "Mr. Carson, I'm afraid there must be some mistake. The venue is confirmed, and the arrangements—" "It's not a mistake," I interrupted, my voice steady, unwavering. "Cancel it, all of it. The venue, the catering, everything. And make sure to inform the rest of the vendors. The wedding is off." The planner hesitated for a long moment, likely scrambling to understand what I had just said. The wedding, the whole operation, was suddenly falling apart. It was a strange feeling. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me felt a cold satisfaction at seeing the chaos unfolding. I could already picture Mark's face when he would get the news. He had no idea that I was the one behind it. No idea that I had the power to bring everything crashing down with a single phone call. The cancellation wasn't just a financial blow, it was a public one. His family's carefully constructed image of success, the one they had spent years cultivating, would crumble under the weight of the sudden chaos. The phone rang again. This time it was from one of the catering managers calling to confirm the change. I confirmed the cancellation, giving them no room to negotiate, no room to salvage any part of the event. I wasn't going to allow them to spin this in their favor. I was taking back control, even if it meant dealing the hardest blow imaginable to a family that had thought they could control me. Once the word got out that the wedding was called off, the ripple effect began almost immediately. Vendors started pulling back, the caterers pulling their staff, the decorators withdrawing their expensive displays. The whole production was unraveling before anyone could blink. But it wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about Mark's entire family and the far-reaching consequences of their greed. They had planned for this event to be a celebration of their wealth and status, a way to cement their place at the top of the social ladder. But I was forcing them to face the truth. Their entire existence had been built on lies, manipulation, and deceit. As I stood in the venue later that afternoon, looking at the empty space where the wedding would have been held, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and resolve. The place that was meant to celebrate a union was now the symbol of their downfall. The grand tables, the extravagant floral arrangements, the orchestra that had been lined up, all of it would go to waste. It was a sobering thought, but it was also a necessary one. Mark's family had tried to humiliate me, to make me feel small and insignificant. But I had turned the tables. I wasn't just canceling a wedding. I was exposing their entire web of deceit. And in the process, I was taking back my power, my respect, and my dignity. The phone calls continued to come in, frantic voices on the other end asking about the situation, trying to figure out how to salvage the plans. But it was too late. The decision had been made. The wedding was off, and so was their plan to manipulate me. They had underestimated me, assumed I would bow to their demands, that I would be too proud to walk away from the pressure. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. It was in that moment, standing there, in that empty venue, watching the vendors clear out, that I realized I had done the right thing. The years of sacrifice, the quiet battles I had fought to protect my family, to protect my reputation, had led me to this point. I wasn't just taking back control over the wedding. I was taking back control of my life, and I was never going to let anyone use me again. I had become a man who could make decisions that would change the course of events, not someone who could be used and discarded. It was a realization that came with both a sense of relief and a deep satisfaction. In that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice, and there was no turning back. As the hours passed, I watched the wedding plans evaporate into thin air, piece by piece. I could almost hear Mark's frustration, his anger boiling over at the disaster unfolding in real time. But what they didn't realize was that they had already lost. The wedding had been their last card, and I had taken it from them with a single phone call. What followed would be even worse. The news didn't take long to spread. Once the wedding was canceled, it seemed like the ripple effects began almost immediately. The phone calls started flooding in, but not from the people I had expected. I had braced myself for calls from Mark's family, angry and desperate, trying to find a way to undo what I had done. But what came next was much bigger and much more public than I had anticipated. The local news outlets picked up the story almost right away. The lavish wedding, which had been the talk of the town for weeks, was suddenly the subject of intense scrutiny. The reports painted a picture of an extravagant affair that was abruptly canceled, with the details surrounding it slowly unraveling in real time. Journalists began digging into the reasons for the sudden disruption, and soon enough, the financial dealings behind Mark's family's businesses came into question. I hadn't expected the media to take such a keen interest in what was essentially a personal matter. But once the wedding was called off, the whole thing became a scandal in the eyes of the public. The focus quickly shifted from a simple wedding cancellation to allegations of financial mismanagement and unethical practices. Mark's family had built their fortune on smoke and mirrors, and now the curtain had been pulled back for everyone to see. Reports started to emerge about shady financial practices, about questionable investments and money trails that led to some very unsavory places. The public was fascinated, and investors began to back away from Mark's family's ventures. It didn't take long for the company's stock price to take a sharp dive, sending shockwaves through the business community. As for Mark's family, their reputation, which had once been carefully curated through years of wealth and influence, was now in tatters. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of my own living room, a sense of calm washing over me as the news report detailed the growing fallout. It wasn't just the wedding that had unraveled. It was their entire empire. The Caldwell family had spent years hiding their financial troubles behind a facade of wealth and sophistication. But now, with everything exposed, the cracks in their armor were impossible to ignore. They were no longer seen as a powerful family, just a group of people trying to save face while their world crumbled around them. In the midst of all the public drama, something shifted in me. There was no longer any sense of shame or regret. I wasn't the villain in this story. They were. I had simply revealed the truth that they had been desperately trying to keep hidden. For years, they had played me like a pawn in their game of manipulation, and now the tables had turned. It wasn't just about canceling a wedding. It was about exposing them for the frauds they were. But it didn't stop there. As more and more people started to question Mark's family's integrity, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a quick scandal that would fade away with time. Investors pulled out of their business ventures. High-profile charity donors, who had previously supported their causes, suddenly withdrew their contributions. Eleanor, Mark's mother, who had long held a position of influence in the community, found herself stripped of her charity board memberships. They were no longer seen as a family to be admired. They were a family to be avoided. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the truth had been revealed for all to see. In the midst of all this, Mark's parents became more frantic. I received several angry phone calls from them, their voices thick with panic and desperation. They tried to convince me to reconsider, to reverse my decision, but it was too late. I had already set the wheels of their downfall in motion, and there was no going back now. "I can't believe you did this." Eleanor's voice was sharp, trembling with rage. "You've ruined everything. You've ruined Mark's future." I could almost hear her trying to control her emotions, struggling to hold back the tears that I knew were about to come. But I wasn't moved by her threats or her guilt-laden words. "You did this to yourself, Eleanor," I said, my voice steady. "All I did was reveal what you were hiding. This is on you, not me." They tried to convince me to meet, to work out a deal, but I wasn't interested in anything they had to offer. What I had done was more than just calling off a wedding. It was about exposing the lies, the manipulation, and the sheer greed that had governed their lives. They had underestimated me, thinking I would just roll over and play along. They never expected that I would find the strength to stand up for myself and take control of my own fate. But it wasn't just Mark's family that felt the backlash. It spread through the community like wildfire. People I had once considered friends began to distance themselves, questioning my involvement in the whole affair. There were whispers behind closed doors, questions about my role in the collapse of the wedding. I had no illusions about the way things would unfold. This wasn't just about protecting my reputation. It was about making sure that I came out of this with my integrity intact. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As I watched the events unfold from my living room, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. What had started as a quiet, personal decision had transformed into a public spectacle, and I was right in the middle of it. But as I sat there, taking in the full scope of the fallout, I realized that this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Mark's family would have to spend years cleaning up the mess they had created. And me? I had walked away from it all. They had tried to ruin me, to make me feel small, but in the end, I was the one who came out on top. My reputation was intact, my business continued to thrive, and most importantly, I had reclaimed my power. There was nothing left to prove to them. I had shown them exactly who I was, someone who couldn't be manipulated, someone who had the courage to stand up for what was right. And as the weeks went by, I realized that what I had done wasn't just about getting back at Mark and his family. It was about setting the stage for a new chapter in my life, one where I could finally take control of my own destiny. After the wedding disaster, I was finally free from Mark's manipulative family. I focused on my business, watching it grow as clients who once overlooked me now sought my expertise. My reputation flourished as I expanded my company, and for the first time in years, I lived life on my own terms. Success wasn't about pleasing others anymore. It was about creating something real. As my business thrived, I realized the power of resilience, honesty, and self-worth. The toxic hold of the past was gone, and I was finally building the future I deserved. After the wedding disaster, I was finally free from Mark's manipulative family. I focused on my business, watching it grow as clients who once overlooked me now sought my expertise. My reputation flourished as I expanded my company, and for the first time in years, I lived the life on my own terms. Success wasn't about pleasing others anymore. It was about creating something real. As my business thrived, I realized the power of resilience, honesty, and self-worth. The toxic hold of the past was gone, and I was finally building the future I deserved.